A millionaire hired an orphan to take care of his daughter, but when he went shopping, she did the unthinkable. The Montero mansion stood imposingly atop the hill, its windows reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. Peter Montero, a 45-year-old widowed businessman, watched the horizon from his study, his gaze lost in memories of happier times. The sound of childish laughter brought him out of his reverie, and a faint smile broke out on his face as he saw his 10-year-old daughter Valerie running around the garden. Señor Montero called a voice from the door. It was Margaret, the housekeeper, a middle-aged woman who had been with the family for decades. "The new nanny has arrived." Peter nodded, preparing to welcome the young woman who would care for his daughter. He had spent months looking for someone suitable, someone who could fill the void his wife's death had left in their lives. Sofia Garcia, 22, shyly entered the studio. Her big brown eyes roamed the room in awe before settling on Peter. "Good afternoon, Mr. Montero," she greeted me in a soft but firm voice. Peter studied her for a moment. She was young, yes, but there was a maturity in her gaze that spoke of experiences lived beyond her age. "Welcome, Sophia," he replied, motioning her to take a seat. "I hope your trip was pleasant." "It was, thank you," Sophia replied, gracefully sitting down. "I am very grateful for this opportunity." As Peter began to explain his responsibilities to her, Margaret watched from a corner, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. There was something about this girl she didn't like, though she couldn't pinpoint what exactly it was. "Your main task will be to take care of Valerie," Peter continued. "My daughter is special. Since we lost her mother 2 years ago, it's been difficult for her to open up to new people." Sophia nodded sympathetically. "I understand, Mr. Montero. I will do my best to earn her trust." "Good," Peter said, getting up. "Margaret will show you to your room and introduce you to Valerie." As Margaret led Sophia through the halls of the mansion, the young woman couldn't help but marvel at the opulence that surrounded her. She had never been in a place like this, so different from the orphanage where she had grown up. "This will be your room," Margaret announced dryly, opening a door. "The bathroom is down the hall. Valerie's room is right next door. I hope you know how to keep proper boundaries." Sophia frowned at Margaret's hostile tone. "Of course, I'm a professional, and I'm here to do my job to the best of my ability." Margaret stared at her for a moment before nodding curtly. "Good. Now, let's go meet Valerie." They found the little girl in the garden playing alone with a doll. Seeing the two women approach, Valerie stood up, her expression wary. "Valerie, honey," Margaret said with a forced smile. "This is Sophia, your new nanny." Sophia knelt down to be at the girl's level. "Hello, Valerie. It's a pleasure to meet you." Valerie looked at her suspiciously. "Are you leaving soon like the others?" Sophia's heart shrank at the question. "No, Valerie. I'm here to stay if you'll let me." The girl seemed to consider this for a moment before returning to her game, ignoring Sophia. Margaret smirked. "Well, it looks like you have your work cut out for you," she commented with a hint of teasing in her voice. That night, as Sophia unpacked her meager belongings, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of hope and anxiety. This was her chance to have a better life, to be part of something. But Margaret's suspicious looks and Valerie's distant attitude reminded her how difficult it would be to earn a place in this family. Meanwhile, in his study, Peter reviewed Sophia's file once again. Something about the young woman intrigued him, an inner strength that seemed to contradict her fragile appearance. He hoped he had not made a mistake in hiring her. In the kitchen, Margaret was preparing dinner, her thoughts turning to the new arrival. She didn't trust Sophia. There was something about her that didn't add up. Why would such a young and pretty girl want to lock herself up in a mansion to take care of a child? He decided he would keep a close eye on her. And so, with Sophia's arrival, a series of events were set in motion that would forever change the lives of everyone in the Montero mansion. What none of them knew was that fate had surprises in store that would test their bonds, their beliefs, and their hearts. Days turned into weeks, and life at the Montero mansion took on a new routine. Sophia tried hard to gain Valerie's trust, but the girl remained distant and reticent. Every morning, Sophia would wake her up with a smile, help her get dressed and walk her through breakfast, trying to engage her in conversation. "What would you like to do today, Valerie?" would ask Sophia eagerly. The little girl would shrug, playing with her food. "I don't know anything." Sophia was not discouraged. How about painting? I've seen you have a lovely watercolor set. Valerie eyed her warily, but finally nodded. It was small progress, Sophia thought, though it would be a long road. Meanwhile, Margaret watched every interaction with a critical eye. One afternoon, while Sophia and Valerie were painting in the garden, the housekeeper approached Peter in his studio. "Señor Montero, may I speak with you for a moment?" Peter looked up from his papers. "Of course, Margaret, what is it?" Margaret closed the door behind her. "It's about Sophia, sir. There's something about her that doesn't add up to me." Peter frowned. "What do you mean?" "She's too perfect," Margaret explained. "Always kind, always willing. And that story of hers of being an orphan, doesn't it seem convenient?" Peter sighed. "Margaret, I understand your concern. But Sophia went through a rigorous selection process. Her references are impeccable." "References can be falsified," Margaret insisted. "What if she's here for your money, sir? A beautiful young woman like her, working as a nanny." "Enough, Margaret," Peter cut in, more subtle than he intended. "I appreciate your loyalty, but we can't judge Sophia based on assumptions." "Give her a chance," Margaret nodded, though her expression made it clear she wasn't convinced. She left the study, leaving Peter deep in thought. What if Margaret was right? Had he been naive to trust Sophia? That night at dinner, the tension was palpable. Valerie ate in silence, while Sophia tried to liven up the conversation. "Valerie did a beautiful drawing of the garden today," Sophia commented, smiling at the girl. "She has a real talent for art." Peter looked at his daughter with pride. "Is that true, honey? I'd love to see it." Valerie shrank back in her chair. "It's no big deal," she murmured. Margaret interjected. "Valerie has always been modest, hasn't she, dear? Just like her mother." The mention of Peter's late wife fell like a slab on the table. Sophia noticed how Peter's face darkened, and how Valerie clenched her fists under the table. "I'm sorry," Sophia said softly. "I didn't mean to." "It's not your fault," Peter interrupted her, forcing a smile. "It's just that it's still hard to talk about her." After dinner, Sophia retreated to her room, feeling discouraged. It seemed that for every step forward she took, she was going back too. She walked over to the window, watching the full moon bathing the garden in its silvery light. Suddenly, a movement caught her attention. A figure was slipping into the shadows, heading toward the back of the mansion. Intrigued and a little alarmed, Sophia decided to investigate. She pulled a robe over her nightgown and crept out of her room. She went down the stairs, being careful not to make any noise, and headed for the back door. As she was about to open it, a hand landed on her shoulder, making her startle. "What do you think you're doing?" Margaret's voice was ice cold. Sophia turned, her heart pounding. I thought I saw someone in the garden. I was going to check." Margaret narrowed her eyes. "In the middle of the night? Dressed like that? Don't take me for a fool, child." "It's the truth," Sophia insisted. "I was worried about the safety of the family." "The safety of this family is my responsibility," Margaret replied. "Go back to your room." Now, Sophia had no choice but to obey, aware of Margaret's accusing gaze following her, until she closed the door to her room. She lay on the bed, her mind whirling. What had she really seen in the garden? And why did Margaret seem so intent on pushing her away? The next day, the atmosphere in the mansion was even more tense. Margaret seemed to follow Sophia's every move, while Peter was distant and pensive. Only Valerie seemed oblivious to the tension, absorbed in her own thoughts. Sophia decided it was time to take the initiative. After making sure Valerie was busy with her lessons, she approached Peter in his study. "Señor Montero, may I speak with you for a moment?" Peter looked at her in surprise. "Of course, Sophia, what is it?" Sophia took a breath. "I feel that there is a certain distrust of me in this house. I understand that I'm new, and that everyone wants to protect Valerie. But I want you to know that my intentions are sincere. I'm here to help, not to cause trouble." Peter watched her silently for a moment. "I appreciate your honesty, Sophia. It's true that there have been concerns. But I want you to know that I trust you. I only ask for your patience. It's not easy for either of us to open up to someone new." Sophia nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. I understand, sir. And I promise I won't let you down. As she walked out of the study, Sophia didn't realize that Margaret had heard the entire conversation from the hallway. The housekeeper clenched her fists, more convinced than ever that Sophia was hiding something, and she was determined to find out what it was, whatever it took. What neither of them knew was that soon, an unexpected event would test all their relationships and reveal truths that would change their lives forever. The morning of July 15th dawned like any other at the Montero mansion. Sophia woke Valerie with her usual smile, although the girl was still distant. Meanwhile, Peter was preparing for an important business trip that would keep him out of town for a couple of days. Take good care of Valerie, he told Sophia, as the driver loaded her luggage into the car. And if you need anything, don't hesitate to call me, Sophia nodded. Don't worry, Mr. Monteiro. Everything will be fine. Margaret watched the scene from the doorway, her lips pressed into a thin line. When Peter left, she approached Sophia. I'll be watching, she murmured before returning to the house. The day passed normally. Sophia helped Valerie with her homework, and then they played in the garden. In the afternoon, Margaret announced that she would go to the market to do some shopping. I'll be back in a couple of hours, she said, staring at Sophia. I hope everything will be in order when I return. Barely half an hour after Margaret left, the ground began to shake. It was barely perceptible at first, but quickly intensified into a violent earthquake. Valerie, cried Sophia, running toward the girls' room. She found her huddled under her desk, trembling with fear. Come on, we have to get out of here. Sophia scooped Valerie into her arms and headed for the door, but a loud creaking sound stopped her. She looked up just in time to see a large chandelier come down from the ceiling. Without a second thought, Sophia threw herself backwards, shielding Valerie with her body. The chandelier crashed to the floor, sending shards of glass in all directions. We're trapped, Valerie sobbed. Sophia looked around. The door was blocked by debris, and the shaking showed no sign of letting up. She noticed that one of the windows was ajar. It was her only way out. Hold on tight to me, Valerie, Sophia said. We're going out the window. Carefully, Sophia approached the window, dodging wobbling furniture and falling objects. She opened the window all the way and looked down. They were on the second floor. The fall would be dangerous. I'm scared, Valerie whispered. Me too, admitted Sophia. But we're going to be okay, trust me. With Valerie clinging to her back, Sophia sat on the windowsill. She took a deep breath and in an act of bravery, leapt toward the nearest tree. Her hands clutched at a branch, but the impact was strong and she felt a sharp pain in her shoulder. Don't let go of me, she gasped, beginning to trudge down the tree. Every movement was agony, but Valerie's safety was all that mattered. Finally they reached the ground. Sophia ran with Valerie toward the center of the garden, away from the house and any structure that might collapse. They dropped to the grass, exhausted and terrified, as the world continued to shake around them. It was several minutes before the earthquake finally stopped. Sophia hugged Valerie, who was crying silently. It's over, honey, Sophia murmured, stroking the little girl's hair. We're safe. It was then that they heard the sound of a car approaching at full speed. It was Margaret, returning from the market. The housekeeper jumped out of the vehicle before it came to a complete stop and ran towards them. Valerie, Sophia, she shouted, her face pale with worry. Are you okay? Valerie threw herself into Margaret's arms, sobbing. Sophia saved me, she said through tears. She jumped out the window with me. Margaret looked at Sophia, who was still sitting on the floor, holding her injured shoulder. For the first time since she arrived at the mansion, she saw the young woman with different eyes. Thank you, Margaret said, her voice cracking with emotion. Thank you for saving our little girl. Sophia nodded, too exhausted to speak. At that moment Margaret's phone rang. It was Peter, frantic with worry. They're fine, Margaret assured him. Sophia. Sophia saved Valerie. She risked her life for her. As Margaret spoke to Peter, Valerie approached Sophia and, to everyone's surprise, hugged her tightly. Thank you, the girl whispered. Thank you for not leaving me. Sophia felt tears running down her cheeks as she returned the hug. For the first time since arriving at the Montero mansion, she felt like she truly belonged there. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The mansion had sustained considerable damage and extensive repairs would be necessary. Peter returned immediately, and after making sure Valerie was okay, insisted on taking Sophia to the hospital to have her shoulder checked. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did," Peter told her as they waited in the emergency room. "You risked your life for my daughter," Sophia smiled weakly. "I couldn't leave her, Mr. Montero Valerie. She's special to me." Peter looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something Sophia couldn't identify. "Call me Peter," he finally said. "I think you've earned that right." Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Margaret was reflecting on recent events. She felt ashamed that she had misjudged Sophia. The young woman had shown herself to be brave, selfless, and genuinely concerned about Valerie. Perhaps, Margaret thought, it was time to give her a real chance. What neither of them knew was that the earthquake had shaken not only the foundations of the mansion, but also those of their own lives. New feelings were beginning to blossom. Long-buried secrets threatened to come to light, and fate had more surprises in store for the Montero family and their spunky nanny. The weeks following the earthquake brought a series of changes to the Montero mansion. While workers were busy repairing the structural damage, relationships among the inhabitants also began to rebuild on new foundations. Valerie, once distant and withdrawn, now constantly sought out Sophia's company. Their shared experience during the earthquake had created a special bond between them. "Sophia, can you tell me again the story of how we jumped out the window?" asked Valerie frequently, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of admiration and excitement. Sophia smiled, stroking the girl's hair. "You were very brave that day, Valerie." "We both were." Margaret, for her part, had made a complete turnaround in her attitude towards Sophia. Initial hostility had transformed into a wary respect that little by little was turning into genuine affection. One afternoon, while Sophia was helping Valerie with her chores in the kitchen, Margaret approached them with a tray of freshly baked cookies. "I thought you could use a snack," she said, placing the tray in front of them. Then, with some hesitation, she added, "Sophia, can I talk to you for a moment?" Surprised, Sophia nodded and followed Margaret out into the garden. "I want to apologize to you," Margaret began, her voice charged with emotion. "I misjudged you from the beginning and that wasn't fair. You have proven to be an extraordinary person, and well, I want you to know that I'm grateful that you're here with us." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Margaret. That means a lot to me." The two women embraced, sealing a new friendship that promised to be strong and lasting. Meanwhile, Peter watched these changes with a mixture of relief and a growing unease that he couldn't quite explain. Watching Sophia interact with Valerie awakened in him feelings he thought he had forgotten since his wife's death. The young nanny had brought light and warmth back into his home, and Peter found himself increasingly drawn to her. One evening, while reviewing some papers in his study, Peter caught himself looking out the window, watching Sophia and Valerie playing in the garden in the evening light. His daughter's laughter, a sound he had heard so little of in recent years, filled the air. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Margaret's voice brought him out of his thoughts. Peter turned, surprised. "Yes, it is. It's been a long time since I've seen Valerie so happy." Margaret nodded, a knowing smile on her lips. "Sophia has been a blessing to this family for all of us." Peter felt himself blushing slightly. "Yes, she has been. Sir," Margaret continued, her tone becoming more serious. "I know it's not my place to say this, but perhaps it's time for you to consider opening your heart again. Life is too short to deny you happiness." Before Peter could respond, Margaret was gone, leaving him alone with his conflicting thoughts. The next few days, Peter found himself looking for excuses to spend more time with Sophia. They shared conversations over breakfast, strolled together in the garden while Valerie played, and even began having late-night chats in the study after the girl went to sleep. It was during one of these conversations that Sophia finally got up the courage to share more about her past. "I grew up in an orphanage," she began, her voice soft but firm. "I never knew my parents. The nuns at the orphanage told me they left me at the door when I was just a baby." Peter listened to her intently, his heart stirring at Sophia's story. "I always dreamed of having a family," she continued. I guess that's why I worked so hard in my early childhood education studies. I wanted to be able to take care of other children, to give them the love and attention that I didn't have. You're an extraordinary person, Sophia, Peter said, taking her hand without thinking. You've overcome so much and still have so much love to give. Their gazes met and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Sophia felt her heart racing as Peter fought the urge to move closer to her. The moment was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Quickly, they parted just as Valerie entered the study, rubbing her eyes sleepily. I had a nightmare, the girl murmured. Sophia got up immediately. Come on, I'll take you back to bed and tell you a story to put you to sleep. While Sophia went out with Valerie, Peter stayed in the study, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He realized he was falling in love with Sophia, but was he ready to take that step? And how would this affect Valerie and the dynamics of their little family? What Peter didn't know was that Sophia was experiencing similar turmoil. The young woman felt increasingly attracted to him, but feared that her feelings could complicate her relationship with Valerie and her position in the house. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the mansion, a long-kept secret threatened to come to light. A secret that could change everything for the Montero family and for Sophia. Fate had set in motion a series of events that would soon come to a climax, revealing truths that none of them were prepared to face. Summer was progressing, and the Montero mansion was bustling with activity. The repairs were almost complete, and Peter had decided to throw a party to celebrate the new stage in their lives. The news of the celebration brought with it a mixture of excitement and nervousness, especially for Sophia. One afternoon, while helping Margaret with the preparations, Sophia couldn't help but feel nostalgic. I've never been to a party like this, she confessed, arranging the centerpieces. At the orphanage, the celebrations were, well, different. Margaret looked at her sympathetically. This will be your first real party, then. You should wear something special. Sophia shook her head. Oh no. I'm just the babysitter, I don't think. Nonsense, Margaret interrupted her. You're part of this family now, come with me. Margaret took Sophia to the attic, where they kept old trunks full of clothes. Mrs. Montero had beautiful dresses. I'm sure we'll find something perfect for you. As they rummaged through the dresses, Sophia noticed an old box in the corner. Curious, she opened it and found a photo album. Flipping through it, she gasped. Margaret, she called in a trembling voice. Look at this. The housekeeper came closer and her eyes widened. In one of the photos, a young woman who was the spitting image of Sophia was smiling at the camera, hugging a younger version of Peter. That's Mrs. Montero's sister, Margaret whispered. She disappeared years ago, shortly before Valerie was born. Sophia felt the world spin around her. Margaret, is it possible that... Before they could continue speaking, they heard Peter's voice calling them from downstairs. Quickly, Sophia put the album away and they both went downstairs, their hearts racing and their minds full of questions. The days leading up to the party passed in a blur of preparations and pent-up emotions. Sophia couldn't stop thinking about the photo she had seen. Could that woman be her mother? And if so, what did it mean for her relationship with the Montero family? The night of the party finally arrived. Sophia, dressed in an elegant blue dress that had belonged to Mrs. Montero, felt like a fairy tale princess. As she descended the stairs, all eyes turned to her. Peter, who was greeting the guests, gasped at the sight of her. Sophia, you look beautiful, he said, taking her hand and kissing it softly. The party was in full swing when Peter asked for everyone's attention to make an announcement. Sophia, standing next to Valerie, felt like her heart was going to burst out of her chest. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, Peter began. This celebration is more than just a party. It's a new beginning for my family. His eyes fell on Sophia as he continued. A few months ago, an extraordinary young woman entered our lives. Sophia has not only been an excellent babysitter for Valerie, but she has become an essential part of our family. She saved us during the earthquake, risking her own life, and has since filled this house with joy and love. Sophia felt tears welling up in her eyes as Peter continued to speak. Sophia, I want you to know that we no longer consider you an employee. You are family. Cass, Peter paused as if gathering courage. And I've come to realize that my feelings for you go beyond gratitude and friendship. A murmur of surprise ran through the room. Valerie looked at Sophia with wide eyes, a mixture of excitement and confusion on her face. Peter, began Sophia, but was interrupted by a gasp from Margaret. The housekeeper was standing at the entrance to the living room, holding the photo album they had found in the attic. "Sir," she said in a trembling voice. "There's something you need to see." Silence fell over the party as Margaret approached Peter and showed him the photo of the young woman who looked so much like Sophia. Peter paled at the sight of her. This can't be," he muttered. Sophia took a step forward, her heart pounding. "Peter, who is that woman?" Peter looked at her, his eyes full of confusion and pain. "That's Helen, my late wife's twin sister. She disappeared more than 20 years ago. We never knew what happened to her." The revelation dropped like a bombshell at the party. The guests began to murmur among themselves, while Valerie looked from Sophia to her father, trying to understand what was going on. Sophia felt the world crumbling around her. If this woman was her mother, did that mean she was Valerie's aunt? Peter's sister-in-law? How would this affect the feelings they had been developing for each other? As chaos erupted at the party, Sophia did the only thing she could think of. She ran. She ran out of the mansion into the garden, needing air and space to process all that was happening. Peter, after a moment of shock, went after her, leaving Margaret in charge of the guests and a confused Valerie. The truth had come out, but the questions it raised were more puzzling than the secret itself. How would they resolve this unexpected twist of fate? And what would it mean for the future of the Montero family and for Sophia? The starry night was silent witness to the emotional turmoil unfolding in the gardens of the Montero mansion. Sophia, her heart racing and her mind a whirlwind, paused by the fountain where she had so often played with Valerie. Tears ran freely down her cheeks as she tried to assimilate the revelation that had just shaken the foundations of her life. "Sophia," Peter's voice echoed in the darkness. He approached her, panting slightly. "Please don't go, we need to talk." Sophia turned to look at him, her eyes bright with tears. "Peter, I don't know what to say. How is it possible? Am I really part of your family?" Peter took her hands in his gaze filled with a mixture of confusion and tenderness. "I don't know for sure, Sophia, but the resemblance is undeniable. Helen, she disappeared without a trace so long ago. We never knew what happened to her." "If she's my mother," Sophia whispered, "why did she abandon me? Why did she never come back?" Peter pulled her to him, hugging her tightly. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise we'll find out together." As they embraced in the moonlight, they heard footsteps approaching. It was Margaret, holding Valerie by the hand. "I'm sorry," said the housekeeper, but Valerie insisted on coming. "She's worried about both of us." Valerie let go of Margaret's hand and ran towards Sophia and Peter. "Is it true?" the girl asked, her eyes big and full of curiosity. "Sophia is my aunt." Sophia knelt down to be at Valerie's level. "We don't know for sure, honey, but it looks like your Aunt Helen might be my mother." Valerie frowned for a moment, processing the information. Then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled broadly. "That means you're a real family. You'll never leave anymore." The simplicity and joy in Valerie's reaction brought fresh tears to Sophia's eyes. She hugged the girl tightly, feeling overwhelmed with love and acceptance. Peter joined in the embrace, wrapping his arms around them both. "He's right, Sophia. You are family, no matter how or why you came into our lives." Margaret watched the scene with a mixture of emotion and concern. "Sir," she said softly, "there is something else you should know." They all turned to her expectantly. "Years ago, shortly before Helen disappeared, I heard her arguing with Mrs. Montero," Margaret continued. "Helen was pregnant. But the baby's father was a married man, someone powerful and influential. She feared for her life and that of her baby." The revelation struck the group like a bolt of lightning. Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. "Helen must have left you at the orphanage to protect you," Peter said, his voice full of understanding. "Maybe she planned to come back for you when it was safe, but something happened to her," Sophia completed, her heart heavy with the tragedy of a mother she never knew. Peter nodded solemnly. "I promise we'll do everything we can to find out the truth, Sophia. You have a right to know what happened to your mother." Valerie, who had been listening intently, gently tugged Sophia's hand. "Does this mean you can no longer marry Papa?" The girl's innocent question caused everyone to fall silent for a moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, Margaret began to laugh. "Oh, my child," the housekeeper said, wiping away a tear of laughter. "Things are not so simple. Sophia is not really your mother's sister. She's her niece, which means there's no impediment to her and your father being together if they so desire." Peter and Sophia looked at each other, a blush tinging their cheeks. Despite the confusion and pain of the latest discoveries, the love that had blossomed between them was still there.